Hi, I'm Sophie and I'm attending conference virtually.
And I'm Taha. Today, Sophie and I are going to talk about our personal data passion projects that incorporate analog hand drawing.
I'm going to share my project about the decline in British wildflower meadows since the 1930s.
And I'm going to be sharing about my book, Street Trees of Seattle, an illustrated walking guide, which came out recently based on publicly available data the city government publishes going back to 1950. Even though everything in this book is drawn by hand and it has this analog feel to it, the whole project would not have been possible without the technology behind it. It was really in 2020 during the pandemic lockdown when many of the streets in Seattle were closed off that I began taking these epic walks and noticing the street trees. And it turns out that Seattle has one of the most diverse collections of street trees in America. It's double the East Coast and triple the Midwest. And only 5% of its street trees are native to that area. To start out, I got this book that you see here called Sibley's Guide to Trees, which was mostly illustrations of trees. But since I was alone during that quarantine, I had no way of knowing for certain if I was identifying trees correctly just by looking at a picture. So that's when I found this other book, Trees of Seattle, that I have also depicted here. It had actual addresses of specific tree species, so I could visit them and see them in person, but it was all text, no pictures. So when I went out on my tree walks, I had to actually take both books with me, and you can imagine how ridiculous I looked. So in the beginning, it was literally out of sheer necessity that I started drawing these tree maps, combining all the information onto a single page so it'd be more convenient to go out on walks. I ended up making a lot of these tree maps. And eventually, I found the publicly available city data. And since I work at a data visualization company, I got predictably obsessed. Now, for my book, I largely focused on trees that had the widest diameter trunks in their genus, since that was the most consistently complete data field. And for some reason, even though this data had existed for decades, something about being guided by these imperfect hand-drawn maps transformed the data points into this magical experience for me. And it was like walking through a portal or into a parallel dimension. Incidentally, out of the 600 plus trees I validated for the book, the species for 22% had been originally incorrectly recorded by the city. So if I had not taken physical walks to see the entire trees in person, and if I was only at my desk limiting my analysis to just the data, as much analysis is often done, I would have missed so much. So not only was the data incorrect at times, but I regularly saw interesting trees that the data had not surfaced. Which reminds me that data is many things, but most of all, data is dangerous because it can lend a false sense of objectivity and truth as if it illuminates the totality of a picture. I believe that deeper analysis requires a level of intimate understanding that must take place beyond the numbers. In making this book, it was my hope that I could take others there, helping them make contact with the urban forest, to know the stories that came before us, and to connect with a sense of place that data by itself can never capture. And with the influx of AI right now, I think the human aspect of data storytelling will only continue to grow in importance.
And my project took the opposite approach to Taha's. For my project, I had started with just one number, 97%. 97% of British wildflowers have disappeared in the last 100 years since 1930. Now, this is a big round number, and I'm always suspicious of big round numbers because, like Taha said, they hide a lot of nuance underneath, but it's still a really important message to get across to people. And a big number, like 97%, is easy for people to understand. So I wanted to show this information in a way that connected with people, but also in a way that was imprecise. So the very nature of how it was visualized helped people understand that this is just a snapshot of a lot of analysis and a lot of work and ambiguity and research that has gone underneath it. So I decided to hand draw wildflower species, and I live in the countryside, so I took inspiration from the field out behind my house that has lots of different wildflowers in it. I drew those on tiles, on pieces of paper, which it really helped me appreciate the data I was working with. I then digitized those tiles and presented them as a waffle chart because 97%, it's a easy way for people to see out of 100, they can see 3 small tiles that are left that have wildflowers in them. I thought this was a very nice way of helping people connect with the data, hopefully helping people feel a bit nostalgic. Lots of people drew flowers as kids, and a way to help people understand that data is all around them, and it's just a way to um, view the world in a digestible format. I hope you've enjoyed our presentation, and we're looking forward to all your questions. From me, thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
If you want to come up front with me, and do we have Sophie online? Yes, excellent. Hi, Sophie. Well, would love to know, do we have any questions from online first? No? Any questions here from the audience in terms of questions for our wonderful presenters? No, I have questions. So thinking about your book, since you're standing here in front of me, thinking about your book and the work that went into it, I mean, I've leafed through it. It is a lot of drawings in terms of those pieces. And I think thinking about that idea of diameter as some kind of controlling factor of what you were drawing, did that also constrain what went into the book itself? Or were there other ways you tried to manage the scope of getting all of this information into one place?
I love that question because I think it's something that a lot of us deal with also, is that all the fields in a data set are rarely filled out or correctly. And for that reason alone, I had to focus on the trees with the diameter piece. But there were so many other fields that would have been interesting. Like they had a field for the tallest. They had a field for a different kind of size measurement. They do it from the drip line. They had even the years. But I found out that even the years were not reliable. And I would have loved to have counted on that. And the reason why the years didn't count, and this is kind of funny for this room, is most of that data was collected by volunteers that were taught how to identify trees. And then they had all done this in the early 90s. And if a tree seemed like it was older, they would estimate how old it was. But then the cherry on top was that the data program they were using only went back to January 1st, 1950. I don't know why. So the oldest trees in Seattle are all from 1950, apparently. Yeah.
That's such a funny way of like looking at a data set and identifying a strange anomaly, right? Emily, did you have a question or are you just kindly hanging out? Excellent. As we go ahead and we look at the work that you did, Sophie, I'm looking at you on the screen down here instead of up here. And the work that you did, you would put these wildflower tiles together. Which flowers went on the tiles themselves, since you only had 3 tiles there to fill in? And how did you decide?
Well, I actually made quite a few more tiles than just 3. They all fit together. I chose a mixture of common flowers that you'd be familiar with, like poppies, and blue cornflowers, and some other flowers that I just see around me in the fields around my house. I was originally thinking about looking at some of the rarer flowers, like the rare orchids, but I didn't think as many people would recognize them, so they wouldn't have the same impact and the same familiarity. I sort of had
And
the opposite problem to Taha. I had a very, very limited amount of data, this one big number. So I was having to flesh it out, opposed to Taha, who was sort of digging through and finding out all the glorious errors and human stories behind why the oldest trees are from 1950. That's brilliant.
I think it's great to see the ways in which you both kind of took this hand-drawn approach, and I loved your call out in the talk all about like focusing on the human aspects of data and what we collect and what we do, especially in this very AI-enabled world.
Absolutely. And I love that someone earlier talked about how data cleaning is like the biggest part of it, right?
It does take a lot of time. Well, Sophie, Taha, thank you so much for your talk today and for being with us. Sophie, I know it's late your side. Thanks for coming to say hello.